Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 10-minute Bitcoin show. Gonna get you out of here before the next block. What are we talking about today? We're talking about hard forks and soft forks. You know, all of this talk about tightening consensus rules and loosening consensus rules, it's really got me thinking about some stuff that we have a lot of precedents for. Now, bear with me here. I think that this is an interesting conversation. So we're talking about the BIP 444 PR, right? We're talking about how conceptually what it's recommending doing is tightening consensus rules, which is a soft fork. Let's go over the definitions real quick before we get in the weeds. Tightening consensus rules is a soft fork. That's a backwards compatible change. Loosening consensus rules is a hard fork. That's a non-backwards compatible change. I think people get those terms like all muddied up, but that's, if you want to understand the difference and what they actually are, that's like the best definition that you can find. There's lots of other nuance that comes along with hard forks versus soft forks and activation and signaling, and is it contentious, is it not, all of that. Hard fork doesn't even necessarily always mean that there's a contentious split. And in fact, if we look at Ethereum, we'll see that that's the case a lot of the time, because we'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. So what this BIP 444 proposal is suggesting is that what they're going to do is tighten consensus rules for a period of time. And then after that period of time has elapsed, they're going to loosen consensus rules. And I think the idea is that they're going to activate all of this in one go, so that technically speaking, it wouldn't actually be a hard fork, because the code, a single code update, is enforcing both the activation and the removal of said activation, so you don't have to go through the process of updating the loosening of consensus rules and creating the situation where you could be splitting consensus over the issue, or something to that effect. I don't think it's helpful to abandon definitions in situations like this. I think it's useful to just clearly define, what do we mean when we mean soft fork? What do we mean when we mean hard fork? The definitions that I'm using here: soft fork means tightening consensus rules, it's backwards compatible. Hard fork means loosening consensus rules, it's not backwards compatible. Now, I liked what Eric Lombroso had to say here. He said, a temporary soft fork is a very nasty can of worms. It assumes people will continue to agree on its expiration date and to remove it after it expires. I wouldn't trust this assumption too eagerly. Otherwise, removing it is a hard fork and we're stuck with it. Now, my immediate observation here, my first thought was that this won't be contentious at all, because of the precedent that's being set by the cult of personality, right? Really, in crypto, you can have two different design philosophies. You either have a cult of personality, where you have like a foundation or an organization or an individual or a cult leader dictating what's the design direction, what's the roadmap, or you have a bottom-up decentralized approach like Bitcoin. It's really the only seriously decentralized project, guys. I mean, come on. Well, we'll get into this more, but like, Luke has already preemptively thought about this, and people discovered this in the code that he had been putting in knots, where basically he had this time bomb coded into the client where you would be forced to upgrade after a certain amount of time. Now, definitionally speaking, this is a kind of hard fork, because one of the design ethoses of Bitcoin, being free and open source permissionless opt-in software, is that when we upgrade the client, when we upgrade the software, we do it in such a way as to keep all software backwards compatible. We don't ever want to try, like, provided that we can help it, right? There might be situations in the future where we are forced to have a hard fork in Bitcoin. It's happened before, I think. And I think the 2106 bug or whatever it is will require a hard fork at some point in time in the future. There might be certain bugs that we can't do with backwards compatibility. But the design ethos of Bitcoin is that whenever possible, wherever possible, we try to maintain backwards compatibility in the software changes, so that you are never in a situation where you're forced to upgrade your client to stay in consensus, right? These other protocols, they don't do this because they've long abandoned this pretense of decentralization. Ethereum, for example, has been having mandatory hard forks for years. So people don't know the history of Ethereum. And if you're an ETH head, you're going to rationalize this in a million different ways. But, to make a long story short, Vitalik built a Rube Goldberg machine with Ethereum. He gave it Turing complete smart contracts, which just allows like infinite recursions and infinite loops until you run out of money. And they launched the Decentralized Autonomous Organization thing, the DAO, back in like 2015 or 2016. I don't know when it was, but there was some bug in the smart contract that caused a ton of money, all of the money in this DAO, to basically get drained out by an attacker. I believe it was Miraso Papasu or whatever that guy's name was. He's dead now. I don't remember his name, but kind of an interesting fellow if you've ever read his blog. But either way, beside all that, since that, Ethereum Foundation decided that they needed to have a hard fork to roll back the chain, to reclaim all of those funds that were lost in the DAO hack. And at that time, Ethereum split into two different networks. It split into Ethereum, what we know as ETH, and ETC, which was Ethereum Classic. And Ethereum Classic were the people that were like, no, you're not going to force us to upgrade to the new network. We're not going to roll back the chain. Code is law. This is an immutable network. Like, this is an immutable ledger. You're not going to roll back Bitcoin balances, or Ethereum balances, I mean. We're not gonna opt into your loosening of the consensus rules. Guys, since ETH did that, they've had like 18 more hard forks. And almost every single one of those hard forks, they were mandatory changes, right? When you're in a situation where you have a foundation dictating development direction of the protocol, and they say, hey, we're doing a hard fork and you have to upgrade to the new software or you're not going to be in consensus with us anymore, you don't have a choice. Like, you have to go along with that. And you'll see people like, no, that isn't true. We've all opted into the changes of Ethereum because we just want better software. Like, that's a ridiculous premise, because I know better, because the vast majority of Ethereum's hard forks since the DAO hack have been driven by like critical security or network issues. Like, we have the DAO fork itself. We have Tangerine Whistle, which addressed denial of service attacks. We have Spurious Dragon, which was more denial of service mitigation, right? These were hard forks. These were mandatory hard forks. And then we had like 5 or 6 that were just designed to stave off the difficulty bomb known as Ice Age, that they had basically done to make mining exponentially more difficult, to try to create this incentive to get people to want to adopt the migration to proof of stake. And they forced users to hard fork like 6 times, I think, to delay this mining difficulty bomb. This is top-down direction of protocol development. This is top-down control of network client upgrades, right? This is antithetical to the way that Bitcoin is designed. Bitcoin is not designed in such a way where a group of people can force you to upgrade to new features. You are never forced to upgrade to a new client in so much as is feasible, right? Up until this point in Bitcoin's history, the vast majority of its software library is backwards compatible. And this is by design, and it makes development much harder, guys. It's a lot harder to deliver backwards compatible upgrades to a distributed protocol like this with a distributed consensus that's very fragile and can easily be split. You don't have to worry about these things when you abandon the pretense of decentralization. When your protocol is run by one guy and his sycophants, they're going to do whatever he says. And when he says, hey, it's time to hard fork, everybody needs to upgrade their clients, people are going to say, yes, master. Like, how high do you want us to jump? And the Ethereum Foundation is a great example of this, right? Because all of the money in their ecosystem, a vast majority of their funding, $32 million just in Q1 of 2025, came from the Ethereum Foundation. They're the ones that are giving people the money to run the infrastructure that keeps the network alive. So when they tell you that you need to upgrade your software version, you're going to do it, right? That's just how this works. I'm not surprised that Knots has come up with this plan to tighten consensus rules and then loosen consensus rules, and that like nobody sees that as an issue. It's because it's not a decentralized protocol. It's not. It's a cult of personality, right? You have to pick one or pick the other. You can't have both. But what makes it really, the unfortunate reality is that these con artists, when they slough off the pretense of decentralization and just veer straight into the land of cult of personality, they can move much more quickly than we can in Bitcoin development land, because we have to go slow. We have to make sure there's consensus. We have to abide by rough consensus in in the change process. And we have to activate changes slowly, and we want them to be backwards compatible. That's much harder than just forcing people to upgrade their software and making old clients obsolete every couple years or every couple months. It's not a good thing. It doesn't bode well.